I'm a single man in his late 20s. I work as a software developer for an excellent company, thus, I'm fortunate enough to be able to work from home. Only once or twice a month do I actually have to go into the office for meetings. My family live about 2 hours away and have little over 100 acres of land to call their own. My mom and dad have a house out there. So does my sister and her husband, with their 2-year-old daughter. And my grandparents on my mother's side. And for the last couple of years, my parents have been waiting for their new house to be finished. Apparently, they were that well prepared for retirement. Once it was finished about a month ago, they asked if I wanted to move into their old house. I happily accepted. I took 2 weeks off of work to move in. The moving process only took a few days, so I spent the rest of my vacation just relaxing. And for me, that meant working on a personal project. Such as life, when your hobby and your career are the same thing, I guess. The town we live in is a decent-sized town. Big enough to have enough to do in your spare time, but small enough to rarely experience any traffic. My family's land is on the outskirts of town. It's a very isolated feeling. The only way in, at least by car, is a 2-mile-long dirt road. The land they own is surrounded by trees, and I don't just mean a few. The woods out here are heavy, to say the least. The internet speeds aren't the best, but they're plenty fast enough for streaming Netflix, gaming, and of course, work. It's a trade-off I'm happy to make. But over the last few nights, odd things have been happening. It started Friday night. I had settled in for the night relatively early, around 11 p.m. I made sure all the doors were locked, a habit of living in the city, shut down the computers, and went to bed. I always fall asleep to Netflix documentaries on my phone, low volume with the phone face down. I'd been lying there for about 10 minutes, when I heard a rather disturbing sound. Distant at first, it sounded like what I can only think to describe as a banshee. It sounded like a woman shouting in fear, perhaps to cause fear in others, but not entirely human. This wasn't a please help me scream you would expect. Each shout only lasted a few seconds, with anywhere between 15 seconds to a full minute between. There were no discernible words, just a single syllable shout. This went on for a good 15 minutes, and the she-demon seemed to be getting closer. The only thing that gave me a bit of relief through this ordeal was that it didn't seem to be heading directly towards me. Sometimes it would be a little to the left of my house, sometimes behind, sometimes to the right. It even sounded at times like it was retreating a little bit into the woods, but it was definitely closer when it ended than it was when it started. See, now I'm a very rational person. At least I like to tell myself that I am, and I have no belief in anything remotely supernatural, but this definitely had me second-guessing myself. I got up and looked through the windows of the back of the house to see if anything was visible. The moon was especially bright with no clouds to block the view, so I could see the backyard and the tree line without the need of a flashlight. I, of course, made sure there was no lights on in my house so that if there was something out there, it wouldn't be able to see in. At least that's what I told myself. Much to my comfort, I didn't see anything sneaking around in the woods. No shining eyes blinking, no speeding she-demons, just grass and trees. I was finally able to fall asleep a little after midnight. The next morning I went into town to get some breakfast from a local restaurant, then to the store for some light grocery shopping, and back home to work. Time got away from me, as it often does when I'm in front of my computer, and before I knew it, 6 p.m. had arrived. My phone rang, interrupting a coffee-fueled workathon. It was my mom calling to invite me over for dinner. That's when it dawned on me that I hadn't eaten since breakfast, so I accepted her invitation. It would also give me a chance to ask if they also had heard of that terrifying she-beast the night before. I brought it up about halfway through dinner. As soon as I finished describing the sound, they both turned to each other and exchanged a quick smile and started to laugh. It turns out the sound I heard is the same sound a female fox makes when it's in heat. They hadn't heard it last night, but had been surprised that this was the first time I heard it since moving out here nearly a month ago. I was skeptical at first, but I decided to look it up once I got home. A few YouTube videos was all I needed to corroborate their story. Sure enough, it was the same sound I had heard the night before. With the matter settled, I went back to my computer. Once again, I called it a night around 11 p.m. and went to bed. Fortunately, there were no banshees that night. Sunday night, however, I heard it again. I felt a little silly at first for not realizing before how obvious it was that this sound was from an animal. But this time it sounded a little different. It sounded more desperate, more fearful than the night before. This prompted me once again to look up noises that foxes make. This time I stumbled upon an interesting and slightly chilling detail that my parents had failed to mention. While it is indeed a sound foxes will make while they're in heat, they will also make it to try and ward off threats. And since once again the sound seemed to be changing locations, I'm guessing the fox was being hunted by something. I looked it up, and apparently they're often hunted by coyotes, which yet another Google search would show they are somewhat common in our area. And just like the other night, this went on for about 15 or 20 minutes before it stopped. A part of me felt a little bad for being glad that it was over, as it likely meant that the fox had been caught, but it was closer to the house than the other night, thus louder, and more annoying. Yesterday, I actually drove to the city I moved from for a meeting. It was the first time being back since I had moved, and I planned to visit some of my favorite places once it was over. In case you were wondering, this is why I worked Saturday. I told my coworkers about the experience, and we all had a good laugh. Once the meeting was over, I spent the rest of the day around town before heading back home. Ended up getting home around 8 or so, watched some Netflix, and went to bed. Once again, I heard a screaming fox. This is where things really started to make my skin crawl, and why I'm posting here to see if anyone else has had similar experiences. See, this time the shouts were coming from beyond the tree line. Way too close for comfort. The idea of a fox being hunted down in my own backyard really didn't settle well with me. The sound grew louder and closer until it sounded like it was just outside my window. To make things even more unsettling, it was storming pretty heavily last night. I went to the window and separated the drapes just enough to peek through. It was damn near impossible to see anything, at least until lightning finally flashed, and when it did, I saw a small red fox darting just out of the woods. A few seconds later, lightning flashed again and the fox darted back into the woods. A few seconds after that, I heard a blood-curdling scream from the poor little animal. Whatever had been hunting it clearly caught it. That last scream was the most painful sound I'd ever heard in my life. But the night still found a way to get worse. I went back to bed facing the window. Not for any particular reason, really. I guess it was my way of paying respects to the little guy. He or she had been a bit of a pest as of late, but not enough that I was happy to know for sure that it had suffered such a painful death. The rain had slowed to a little more than a trickle at this point, but I could still hear it on the roof. But then I heard another sound that really sent chills up my spine. It sounded like footsteps coming from the woods, but not normal footsteps where you may hear some twigs snapping. Each step sounded almost like a shovel going into the ground. They also came in pairs. Pauses between each pair. Shick. Shick. A few seconds later. Shick. Shick. It almost sounded like something was limping. But I wasn't sure. And I certainly had no idea what kind of creature would have such odd-sounding footsteps. The sounds grew closer, and unlike the shouts of a fox, the footsteps were coming directly towards my house. More specifically, directly toward my bedroom window. The drapes were still about an inch or two apart, but no lights were on in my home. Also, my house is on a crawlspace foundation, not the most even terrain. The bottom of the window was damn near 6 feet off the ground, if not a little more than that. I had never measured it, but I'd like to think it was a pretty accurate guess. The steps continued until they were just outside my window. We're talking inches away. I had silenced my phone during the fox ordeal so that I could hear what was going on, and this was the point where I would regret it. So whatever it was just outside my window. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear what sounded like very light breathing. Though it could have just been the wind. At least that's what I told myself until the lightning flashed again. The silhouette of what looked like a tall, thin man flashed against the drapes. I could see not only a head, but also shoulders, and perhaps most terrifyingly of all, the lightning flash also revealed a small area of fog in the window that I could just barely see between the drapes. And with each quick flash of lightning strikes, it seemed to shrink and grow, like this disturbingly tall person was breathing right against my window. It may have only been a minute, but it felt like an eternity, and eventually I heard footsteps once again that, from the sound of it, were heading back into the woods. I have no idea who or what this thing was. I tried to tell myself that it was just my dad playing a cruel joke, but my dad would never kill an animal. Not even for sport, let alone for a gag. He's also not tall enough to see in my window, nor is he thin enough to fit that profile. The next morning I went outside and verified that the bottom of the window is 6.5 feet from the ground. Whatever this thing was, it was at least 7 feet tall. And though this last detail may just be my imagination, the silhouette seemed to have poor posture, as if it was slouching. There's no telling how tall this thing is, but I'm hoping it doesn't come back. My parents are having a party tonight. I'm actually heading over as soon as I post this story, and I have every intention of drinking more than usual so that I'll have a viable excuse for sleeping at their house tonight. I know it sounds childish, but I really don't want to be alone tonight. I'll keep you all updated if anything else noteworthy happens.